So you want to try out gaming on the classic Commodore Amiga computer? Amigas aren't as simple to emulate as the game consoles from the era, that's for sure. This primer will teach you the system architecture and basic terms you'll need to know about the classic Amiga computer, with a focus on getting up and running for gaming. I'm going to go over CPUs, the Amiga's custom chips, the different RAM types, ROMs, which cover floppy disk images and Kickstart ROMs, and WHDLoad, a modern way of running most Amiga games. I linked to the emulators I'm currently using in the video's description. Psst! If you just want to get right to it, use WHDLoad archives on an Amiga 1200. That'll work for most games. Amigas use the Motorola 68000 family of CPUs. The first Amiga runs at around 7 MHz. Faster processors, like the 68020 and the Amiga 1200, also offer more functionality. However, some games might not like running on an 020 or higher. If a game seems to run strangely, downgrading the CPU may be a simple change. One of the things that make Amiga computers Amigas are the custom chips. The custom chips take on lots of functionality, so the CPU can focus on running code. There are 3 flavors of custom chips: the original chipset, the enhanced chipset, and the advanced graphics architecture chipset. Each revision improved on the chipset's resolutions and color ranges. For a lot of games, you're fine setting your emulator to an Amiga 1200, which uses the AGA chipset. There are some games that won't work in AGA though, so you'll have to switch back to OCS or ECS by emulating an Amiga 500 or 500 Plus. Amigas have a few different types of RAM. There's chip RAM, which the custom chips use to coordinate efforts, fast RAM, which the CPU uses more efficiently than chip RAM, and some other types of RAM, which are basically fast RAM as well. Unless the game says otherwise, the Amiga 1200 default of 2 MB of chip RAM, or an Amiga 500 Plus with 1 MB of chip RAM, should be fine. Then, dump in about 8 MB of fast RAM. Some games may benefit from the extra RAM, and few will have problems with it. The Amiga has ROMs, but they're not like the ROMs that game consoles at the time have. The game ROMs you likely have are probably ADF files, either RAW or in zip files. These are Amiga disk files, bit-for-bit copies of original floppy disks. You put these into virtual floppy drives of the emulator, and the Amiga treats that file like a physical disk in a drive. If there are multiple disks for a game, your emulator will support some way to use them all. Way easier than the old way of doing things. The ROMs you do need, however, are Kickstart ROMs. Kickstart is the code that gets the Amiga up and running from power on. On a physical Amiga, the Kickstart code is burned onto chips. For emulators, you use the code as a file. The version of Kickstart you want to use depends on the game you want to run. I typically start with the most recent version, then step down to older, sometimes much older, versions until the game works. You can avoid messing with floppy disks, Kickstart versions, and sometimes chipset issues if you use the WHDLoad versions of games. WHDLoad bundles up all files into one directory, virtually loads new Kickstarts if needed, and applies patches to fix issues when running on newer Amigas. WHDLoad games are sometimes packaged in a way that certain emulators can just run them from an archive file. If you want to do more than just games on your setup, there's some extra steps involved. Who knows? The recommended video over there might even cover all that. It could happen.